Hi, Juan. Can you hear me?
Hi, how are you? Fine, fine and well.
Good. Thanks for agreeing for this interview. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, I'm just going to pull up my uh, questions.
Yes.
And is it okay if I just send you the recording afterwards?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I fiddled with the settings. I couldn't figure out how to.
Yeah, don't worry. I think it's better and it's easiest.
Cool. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, there's the questions. Okay, I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So it's almost 1:30, and then we'll get us through as many questions as you want. Did you have an order of the questions you want me to ask first, or just go through them as we go?
Well, according with your last email, we could, comment on those 4 or 5 questions you sent.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to start recording.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Let's see. Okay, we're good. Juan, thanks for joining me today for New Rural, and we just want to talk about Paul Virilio, a scholar who only recently passed away, and try to continue a conversation that he had with his colleague Sylvain L'Étranger through the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s in a novel or a book called Pure War. So to start a first question, how will cities change in the future to facilitate increased surveillance and policies that emphasize endocolonization over and against extraterritorial defense?
Well, this is an interesting question. Thank you very much for your interest on interviewing me, and after you're reaching me, I hope I may be able to, if not giving just a guide, about some topics that are a little bit far and away from my architectural and urbanist specialty, at least give you some kind of guidance. But this first question, in a way, is very close to my interest on Virilio and his idea of the ultra city. First, let me describe, or at least quote, describe more what endocolonization means, which basically is the attack or the invasion from whatever part it is, you name it, the state or the enemy, whoever, to its own territory or of our own body, right? So endocolonization means to attack ourselves, to invade ourselves in some sort of process. So I would say that for me, this question is better answered by Virilio on his famous essay, The Overexposed City. Why? Because basically in this essay, which was published for the first time in his famous book, Lost Dimension, he mentions his concern about security, right? He argued that the traditional city has moved in terms of security from walls and gates to media protocols that in a way occupy or define what security is all about in the ultra city. So this is also attached with the idea of 3 or 4 revolutions, from transport revolution, which is circulation, to the revolution of materials and architecture, the transparency and exposure revolution and the ubiquity revolution of the screen. So with those, let's say, pins on mind, I would say that it's not that the cities will change significantly in a physical way, but I think the ultra city is changing the condition of the human beings as being at home everywhere, right? Working or at home everywhere, but also the disfavored classes are facing the other condition of being at home or in the office nowhere. So this kind of dichotomy is quite interesting. I would say that Virilio's concern about this change in the public space or the urban realm, in a way, is framed in two or three main points. His concern of the vertical urbanization, tall buildings. Basically, his concern as well, his preoccupation on the inter and intra migration in between cities, but also within major megalopolis. And also, I think it's very important to understand all the time that Virilio was very heavily influenced by phenomenology, right? So all his work is based on the preoccupation of resisting technology, although he is really fascinated about technology of transportation, communication, media, information, etc. The common thread in all his work is this kind of resistance, right?
So he might have been interested in how the masks people are wearing to combat coronavirus are actually frustrating surveillance technologies.
Absolutely. This is quite interesting because after recently, as you mentioned, he passed away on September 2018, right? But the coronavirus is giving the chance for a lot of his topics in a way to get physical. No, I mean the distance among people, this 2-meter distance, security distance, in relation to the ubiquity of the screen, we are in a way getting more anxious, to touch, to embrace people, no, after the ubiquity of being everywhere, but without being able to touch our neighbors in a way. And also, this idea of the local, no, instead of being global. I mean, I think what is happening, at least in Barcelona and Spain and in other places in Europe, is that the coronavirus has also highlighted the importance of having your productiveness not that far away. So I think that's quite important. The local idea that was very, very, influential in the 90s now is being revised and reviewed with a very heavy interest on local issues and going back to another kind of security, going back to the local and going back to the body itself.
Which gets into Foucault and Virilio's idea of biopower, about how the state controls bodies.
Yeah. This is Virilio is very, prolific. His work, his body of work is very prolific, and you can jump from one topic to the other. But I would say, just to give a guidance, the common thread in Virilio is this kind of resistance, right, of different technologies, of in relation to space and in relation to the body itself as a phenomenological, he was the student of Merleau-Ponty, who is a very famous, well-known phenomenologist. So all his body of work, of way of understanding boundaries or frontiers, resisting and defending these frontiers in order to break them afterwards. No, but yeah, physically talking, we will see, augmented reality and a kind of, the relation between real space and virtual space, there are going to be this kind of virtual space divide is going to be solved in different ways. Coronavirus, what it's doing is in a way accelerating this kind of division.
Mm-hmm. Which goes into his concept of speed.
Exactly. Dramology, mainly, right?
Exactly. He has an image of how France had to get rid of trees alongside of the highways because people were crashing into these trees as things sped up, just as the automobile had the capacity to go faster. I witnessed this actually in front of my house this week. Somebody swerved off and hit a telephone pole and shook everything on the street. And this is in a time where everyone's more nervous. No one wants to be outside of their homes because of the fears of the coronavirus. So you have this crisis that is existential in a lot of ways. Here's this invisible enemy that causes me to drive faster, but speed itself becomes an enemy.
But if you ask me, my point of view would be, of course, here in Spain, the south of Europe, we are, let's say, 1 month in front of the States, Mexico, etc., in terms of our experience to coronavirus. But what we are seeing, at least in Barcelona, of course, the density, the urban density in Barcelona is a key factor in relation to how we, in a way, socialize and how we use public space and all the controls behind this built realm, let's say. But what I am seeing is a kind of returning to the actual, you may, of course, there is, I wouldn't say fear here in Spain. It's not fear anymore. It's like a kind of anxiety to go back to the original, public space, to hug people, to touch things, to have a beer together. So this coming back to the origin, to the body, is something that in a way is quite present. At least nowadays we are entering phase one of the gradient of getting back to normal, to this new normality. But you were saying something quite interesting of this power of going into the body, right? I would suggest, Virilio was also very critical on the work of this artist, Stark, that in a way implanted different chips and different things in the body, again, endocolonization, but he was more, acting like coming back to the body as a kind of how the body in a way occupies a space through dance, through different kind of artistic ways, right? So in a way, I think, he was very preoccupied about information invading the body. Of course, a lot of argument has been, in a way, behind the coronavirus, if this is a virus that has been, in a way, manipulated, edited, or conspiracy theories are all the way through. But I would say the information bomb in Virilio is quite relevant in today's debate, right? Because he argues that after speed brings with itself information. And information, in a way, is so powerful, or could get so powerful, that in a way invades the body. So in relation with coronavirus, this is quite interesting.
Let's move on to another question about medical technology. If we do see lifespans lengthen dramatically, and if we see the ability to have machines in our body test us by the minute for new viruses, right? So that we could see a map of where viruses are on bodies within your city or your country. At the same time as doubling and tripling current lifespans. What does that do to the political and dramological reality of medical interventions? And what is the reality in politics of such interventions?
Well, Virilio, in this regard, I think there are 2 points of view here. The point of Virilio in terms of his concern going against all the powers behind the manipulation of the genetic bomb, no?
Mm.
After the information bomb, the last bomb would be the genetic bomb, no? And he mentions the power, the economical and interest power of pharmacists, no, pharma industries that in a way manipulate the way in which the virus or any disease could be treated on one hand side, but also how fear in a way is behind the idea of getting as soon as possible the vaccine, in this case for coronavirus, for autism, for whatever, no? So in a way, I would say that as a kind of a point of departure, Virilio is very clear in terms of his preoccupation of dramology after the genetic bomb. In my opinion, Virilio is not that concerned about the longevity of the body, right? But it's more critical on the power and the speed behind genetics, eugenics.
And eugenics.
Exactly. So for him, anytime Lotringer or anytime Armitage, another scholar that is very well known in his work about Virilio, every time Virilio was questioned about the role of eugenics, the genetic and the information bomb and dromology, as a Catholic, as a believer, right, as a phenomenologist, he was all the time very reluctant and resistant to this idea. However, he opened up the several doors, about his preoccupation of the manipulation of Jewish people in the German camps to what is happening nowadays, with genetics and eugenics. That would be my answer in this question.
So even like Syria creates another genetic bomb. A desire to purge, a desire to keep the borders free of a sort of like an introduction of a different sort of genetic history.
Yeah. I think something that the coronavirus has in a way taught all over the world is that it's a very democratic virus in a way, no? It attacks everyone, but also there are no limits, no borders, no frontiers at all. So I think that was one of the main points of Virilio in relation to the idea of the ultra city. You become a global citizen, especially by technology, which in a way makes you a kind of god by 3 main aspects, which is the ubiquity of technology. It makes you ubiquitous in a way, makes you synchronized to everyone at the same time, etc. No? But I would say that what is happening in terms of medicine and what is going beyond eugenics and genetics, etc. What we see is that the role of the public service has been critical in relation to how to manage this kind of diseases. The Spanish health service is not the best in Europe, but it's one of the best in Europe. So although we were the second, to suffer the consequence of coronavirus, we did quite well in comparison to the density and the number of people in Spain, right? England is not doing that well. Its National Health Service is fairly okay, no? Germany is doing very well because although in Germany the virus reached quite late or later in a way, his health public service is very strong. So what we are going to see is not only the return to the space, to the urban space, to the contact to the body, but also the idea of saying goodbye to neoliberalism and going back in a way to the public idea of reinforcing our health systems. That would be, on one hand side, in my opinion, one of the consequence of what we are living, and the other, on the other extreme would have, the whole research and the whole speed and dromological race behind pharmacists in order to find vaccines and in order to keep, designing this kind of genetic bombs.
And so it kind of goes beyond politics in a lot of ways.
Yeah, in my opinion, absolutely.
Oh,
well, you could say something very interesting, quotating Virilio as well, is that the city used to be the place of election. Now this ultra city is the place of ejection. This playing of words. I mean, the democratic idea of the city is that I make an election of my candidate. But now the city, the ultra city, is a place in which you are ejected. You don't have any more the power anymore to elect anyone. You are ejected by dromology, by forces that are beyond politics, economical forces, etc., but mainly by the forces of information.
And this could lead into maybe one of our last questions. In America, the Trump administration seized on coronavirus to enact various xenophobic-inspired policies, travel bans, deporting minors with no lawful immigration status, and ICE raids. Does xenophobia, discrimination, and racism fit into Virilio's conception of the original accident? Or to expand the question, what's the original accident of democracy?
Well, that's a kind of a very complex question, but I would say the accident of the democracy is fear and speed, right? I would say first, speed and media have manipulated our emotional response to politics. So politics have mutated in politics of emotion driven by media. And media is driven by speed and information. But I would say one of the best contributions of Virilio was with John Pardon in his famous exhibition Exit that took place in France something like 10, 12 years ago. In this exhibition, Exit, that afterwards Diller and Escofidio collaborated, with very fancy and very sexy diagrams mapping migrations, not only migrations within the city, but all migrations intercities. Something that in a way is kind of peculiar is that this xenophobia and this banning, in terms of frontiers in order to get to the European Union, is something that in a way we are going to see even further, right? The typology of concentration camps have moved to a new kind of typology of migration camps, which in a way are cities on itself, right? We can see this phenomena in the border between Mexico and the States quite clearly, and in different parts of the world. But this migration, these huge amounts of people migrating are gonna be, an accident on itself.
Interesting. So, as a final question, what scholars, along with yourself are continuing the trajectory of Paul Virilio and Sylvain L'Etranger's work that they did in books like Pure War. And also, what are some of your most recent projects that you've worked on and that you are working on?
Yes, I would say that after Virilio, although he's not completely clearly stating his influence, Bernard Stiegler, also a French theorist, a philosopher, is very influenced by his work and is following up a lot of Virilio's ideas. As scholars, I would say John Armitage in Winchester, UK, is one of the best experts of Virilio. I did interview Virilio personally. I had the pleasure to meet him in La Rochelle a few years ago. He was a very fascinating character, I would say. I'm about to defend my PhD thesis on Virilio, on this thread, this common thread on his work, that is the resistance of different technologies in order to return to the body. But I focus on four main aspects: the bunker, which is one of his first works. No, with the bunker, he goes against military technologies and speed. Then the oblique, this kind of typology game and play of slanted surfaces that during the 60s were conceived as a vehicle in order to resist communication technologies, TV, etc. In those 60 crazy times, right? Dromology also is, is a very key topic on Virilio's work in order to go against space, right? Time, favoring Virilio's scope on time rather than space. And mainly the ultra cities, the main aspect on his, that, embraces everything, and that also finishes in a way, concludes better said his work. So I'm, setting a few exhibitions. I have set different exhibitions. I lecture in different places about Virilio. I write, I have this interview and other writings on Virilio, but mainly I'm right now focused on my PhD dissertation that is gonna be hopefully in 2-3 months time. So this is what I am right now concentrated on as an architect and as an urbanist based in Barcelona, and also with a kind of extension in Mexico City.
And the pandemic didn't interrupt your studies?
Well, the pandemic interrupted everything, everything. But I could manage somehow because, of course, right now I'm in the last process of rewriting the thesis. And the pandemic interrupted work in terms of teaching, in terms of designing, in terms of, but I've been quite lucky because I've been able to follow with my thesis advisors and everything on Zoom, right? As we are now having this interesting chat together. But yeah, this is what I would suggest, and this is my actual scope on Virilio's work.
So yeah, because people have less space to go to, they still have cyberspace.
Exactly.
So in some ways, they're more available.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. Although every aspect takes 2 or 3 more times more time and effort in order to make something happen, because of the way in which we manage, time schedules, but also technologies.
That's so interesting. I wish you the best as you defend your dissertation and finish. That's an exciting time, and I appreciate you taking some time out for New Rural. I'm going to stop